Yeah, I haven't seen any notes or anything people are having trouble getting in besides us.
No, it seemed like they sat in the waiting room for a bit, but there doesn't appear to be anyone in the waiting room. Do you guys think we should just start?
Yeah.
Yeah,
Okay.
that's good.
Do you want me to kick off then, Matt? And I'll introduce. So for those of you that don't know me, my name is Henny Hanegraaff, and I'm the director for Area J of the RDCK. In other words, I'm probably your director. And I'll let the RDCK staff go around and introduce themselves. Why don't we start with Amy?
Thanks, Henny. So I'm Amy Wilson. I'm the Resource Recovery Manager, and so I oversee the department that the composting sits within.
Great. Uli, do you want to? Okay, I just got a message from Deb that the sound is good, so that's good to know. Sorry, go ahead, Uli.
Hello, I'm Uli Wolf, the General Manager of Environmental Services and Resource Recovery, so waste and recycling is part of my department.
And Matt?
Yeah, my name's Matt Morrison. My role is Organics Coordinator, so I'll be doing the presentation, and I've been coordinating the process of bringing the curbside collection services to referendum. So yeah, I think I'll just jump into the presentation there.
Yeah, let's just say this, that because this is being recorded and just for better flow for people looking at it later, we're going to go through the presentation and then do questions after the presentation is complete. Take it away, Matt. I'll mute myself and everyone will be really happy.
Okay. Just give me a moment here to share my screen.
And if anybody should have audio problems, it helps when everybody's muted that is not speaking.
Yeah, absolutely. And feel free to use the chat to either ask a question sort of throughout, but we will come to questions at the end. And if you're having sort of any issues with audio, please do use the chat and we'll keep an eye on that. You can see my screen okay there? You can see the presentation slide. Great, so yeah, just we are recording this session, and the intention is to post the presentation and the slides online. So if you have any concerns with that, please do let us know. But we are recording. The session is currently being recorded. Thank you. So welcome to this presentation information session for the upcoming referendum on curbside collection services for portions of Area J for garbage and food waste. We'll kind of go through who we are a little bit more, get into some background information in terms of how we got here, talk about eligibility for the services and for voting, description of the services, landfill diversion and waste reduction, and then questions and answers. So yeah, as mentioned, the Director Hanegraaff, Uli, Amy, and myself are in the meeting today, and like to acknowledge and respect the Indigenous peoples within whose traditional lands we're all meeting. So that would be the Ktunaxa, the Snakes, and the Syilx peoples. Background for curbside collection services. Much of the work that we do in our organization is guided by the Resource Recovery Plan, and this is sort of a 10-year guidance document that supports and helps us make decisions and provide strategic direction for how we go about managing waste in the region. So we have this guidance document called the Resource Recovery Plan, which was approved in 2022. Within it, curbside collection services for municipalities and rural areas was identified as an effective method of reducing the amount of waste that's landfilled, as well as increasing access to services and increasing especially organic waste diversion from our landfill. As part of that, the RDCK completed a feasibility study region-wide for curbside collection services in rural communities. And that was done in 2020, and it assessed, again, predominantly feasibility of these kinds of services in a rural environment, stretching from Creston all the way up to Nakusp, including Area J and areas outside of Nelson and Castlegar. It was recommended that we investigate the possibility of this service, these kinds of services further. And so we took the method of service delivery in the context of that feasibility study, and we asked the public in 2021 through a phase 1 consultation, or first round of consultation, what the position was on this kind of service, and if there was sufficient interest to sort of, carry on with additional rounds of consultation and service planning, et cetera. So that 2021 report is available publicly, and it gave strong indication that further round of consultation was worthwhile and necessary. So in 2023, last spring, sort of January until April, we conducted an additional round of consultation, more or less region-wide with a little bit more of a specific areas, which included Area J. And we developed these new service area boundaries and this service establishment bylaw that is being brought to a referendum based on what we heard in the consultation in 2023. So, the results of both of those consultations, but especially the phase 2 consultation, we're leaning on heavily to sort of guide the service establishment bylaw process and bringing these proposed services to a vote. So just a sort of visual timeline, 2021 and 2020, the feasibility study and first rounds of consultation were completed. We completed that spring 2023 consultation, phase 2. We developed these service establishment bylaws, which are what are being voted on in the referendum, sort of outline the ability of the RDCK to implement the services. May 11th is general voting day. So spring 2024, the referendum is being held. And if the referendum is successful, the service for curbside collection in Area J could be established by mid-2025. So certainly want to make sure that folks are informed on their eligibility to vote. So basically, if you're eligible to vote in a provincial and municipal election, the answer would be yes. With this specific service, you have to also be a resident within the service area boundary that the service is being proposed. And so that means that's why it's referred to as the defined portions of electoral Area J. So you have to be within that service area boundary, not just a general Area J resident, but actually within the boundary that the service is being proposed. Please do verify that eligibility to vote. All residents and homeowners can vote. So tenants and landlords can vote, but please do confirm that and then go to the polls. So in terms of the service area boundary, as just mentioned, the green background areas are what are called the service area. So any household that's a single family home, not a multi-development or multi-family housing development, not industrial or commercial, single family homes who independently manage their waste are considered eligible for services. So any resident who resides within these areas is eligible to vote, and any household that meets those other criteria is eligible to receive services. There is a wider catchment of eligibility to vote than potential eligibility to receive services, because that's a slightly finer toothed comb. So if you're uncertain, please do verify, but eligibility both for services and voting is guided extremely informed by the map here. And so there's that resident eligibility for voting rather. There's also non-resident property owner eligibility. So this is if you live outside of the RDCK, but you own property. Very similar parameters in terms of provincial municipal election criteria. You have to have owned the property for a minimum of 30 days, 1 vote per owner. So even if you have multiple properties as well, you get 1 vote per owner of a property in the RDCK. If you're a non-resident, if it's a joint ownership, you require written consent from the co-owners. And again, please do just, if that, if that is you, please do confirm that eligibility beforehand. So the service. What is being proposed is a curbside collection program or a roadside collection program where food waste would be collected weekly. We would provide a curbside container that would be classified as bear resistant, and that would be a third-party classification through WildSafe BC. We would also provide a small kitchen catcher. So this would be a kind of thing that sits on your countertop, and as your food scraps go into it, and then that material gets transported out to the curbside container. We'll go into details around size and shape of bins in a bit. This is just a first step. The garbage component of the service is being proposed as a bi-weekly or every second week garbage. We would provide a garbage container, which would be classified as wildlife resistant, not bear resistant, wildlife resistant. So this would be something that could deter smaller animals, but a bear would likely get into. And the existing recycling service, if you're someone who receives curbside recycling, remains unchanged and is not impacted in any way by this process. We would look to alternate garbage with the existing recycling service. So 1 week you would get food waste and garbage, and the next week you would get food waste and recycling. So every week food waste, but garbage and recycling alternating. The green cart or the green bin that we have developed the service around would be bear resistant. And so this is a huge component of the program and definitely a necessary tool to aid in reducing and mitigating bear situation and bear conflicts. So we have significant grant funding that allows us to purchase for the community these more expensive, earlier bins that come with or would come with a wildlife resistant locking mechanism. So this would be a metal bar or something similar that secures the bin, has been sort of certified as bear resistant through real world testing with bears and under sort of like either BS conservation officers or in wildlife recovery situations, sort of like Kamloops Wildlife Park or that kind of thing. They do this sort of work. We've modeled it after communities that have large bear populations and deal with bear conflicts regularly. The food waste container is expected to be between 40 and 80 liters, but most likely 46. And so that would be the smaller green cart. And, it would be made out of, rigid plastic and then have some sort of locking mechanism that prevents that lid from being opened. These bins are not purchased. The purchase, supply, and replacement is included in the annual cost, but we haven't purchased these bins as that process needs to go through competitive bidding and is sort of contingent on the outcome of the referendum. The garbage bins, we won't know the exact shape and size again until that procurement process should it advance. But it would be, at most about 120 liters, be classified as animal resistant, so able to keep out skunks and dogs and raccoons and other critters that aren't as powerful as a bear. And the cost of these bins is built into the annual per household estimated fee, which we'll get into in some more detail. That $283 a year per household. Note that most attractants should be within a green bin. Is that sort of food waste? That's where that kind of material. That's typically the material that draws in animals. So that's why we're going with an animal resistant, not a bear resistant for this one. But other attractants, that may be within a garbage would still need to be managed carefully as they currently are. Because folks have the same waste, and people are managing it currently with wildlife in mind. Want to just touch on a few logistics. You frequently asked questions and other things that we often get. So in terms of where the bins would be collected, it would be wherever a private road meets a public road. And so, you know, if it's at the bottom of your driveway or if it's just right in front of your house, it's just wherever your private property intersects a public road, but not right out on the road, certainly set back from the road, you know, for things like winter, where snowbanks accumulate and plows move through, you want those bins set back. We're not looking at an automated service. It would be a manual service, and so someone would actually be getting out of a vehicle and interacting with the bins, either by placing them on a lift or just about emptying out the contents manually. But we aren't proposing or considering an automated service for this, most likely. And a couple of things to point out. In terms of feasibility and logistics, a lot of people have had concerns around that. Is that waste collection services do currently exist within this area and throughout the Kootenays successfully, as well as through other rural communities throughout British Columbia. So there's lots of places that are rural and remote and have lots of wildlife that have these kinds of services and implement them successfully. The recycling collection, for example, sort of is a case study that this kind of service is feasible within a rural environment. And as logistical concerns come up, we'll certainly work to address those, you know, proactively and with potentially a level of creativity that is required for our local geography and communities. Touched on wildlife, just think it's worth going into it a little bit further. So waste within people's homes and on their properties is currently managed with bears and other animals in mind. So that's something I think is important to point out, that this isn't new waste that we're proposing get picked up at the curb. It's the same waste that people currently have. You know, maybe they're storing it for 2 weeks at a time, or maybe they're storing it for 1 week at a time, or even longer. Maybe they're composting it year round or for some of the year. So it's the same waste, we're just, you know, looking at potentially a different way of managing it. Obviously, leaving carts full of food waste out in the open is not an option. These bins would need to be kept secure somewhere indoors, ideally. But you know, we've seen success with people like rigidly attaching carts to something that cannot move. Using these lid locking mechanisms can also deter animals and reduce the frequency and the likelihood of bears habituating to food. Cleaning bins and using bin liners is also a good strategy. Keeping meat and other highly attractive food waste cool or frozen in between collection days. So, you know, just every week, you know, you take your little bit of meat scraps out and you put them in morning and collection days, so they're not sort of festering within the bin. And you can also layer within the bin some carbon, so leaves or you know, shredded newspaper, cardboard, straw if you have it. What we refer to as browns. Layering in there helps sort of keep smells down and can mitigate some concerns for attraction that way. Weekly collection, so having this food waste leave properties every week, you know, 52 weeks a year. You know, just, you know, maybe there's a week or two through the year where service is disrupted for this or that reason. But taking that material away can actually reduce the amount of attraction within properties year round, you know, especially when you think of the amount of attraction that backyard compost create for skunks and raccoons, as well as bears. And so I think that's something to point out. You know, these bins would prevent those smaller critters from getting in, and rats. I'm not sure if Area J has rat issues, but certainly a lot of areas have had to stop composting because of rats, because they do eat and breed around these sources of food. So getting into the costs, the per household cost that you see, you know, on the flyer that we sent out, or which will be on the ballot, the per household cost, as well as the maximum requisition amount. We developed these estimates, and we basically, the maximum requisition amount is the total amount that would be collected from all of the eligible households and that's where we get that that $406,818. So that's 1,437 households are within our service area. We've developed a per household cost, 283, and there you go. So what comprises that $283? I think some people have really been curious about that. Over half of it is the cost of collection. So that would be it would be a contracted service, not sort of RDCK trucks or anything. It would be a contracted service, and that's most of the cost. The material that's collected has to be disposed of for a fee over the scales. And then there's about 10% for staff time. So this would be coordination of the service through our administrative team, as well as a program coordinator to sort of develop the education and promotional material, do education and outreach with the community for things like bin checks or contamination issues. The container costs themselves are only 4% of the estimated fee. And then we built in a healthy buffer, 15 to 20% contingency, to sort of help us absorb unforeseen costs and expected inflation into the future. So the question that residents are voting on is whether or not you're in favor of the regional district adopting the curbside service establishment bylaw for Area J. And the biggest part of that service establishment bylaw is the maximum requisition amount. That's $406,000, $283.06 per household. And so you'll be voting yes or no on, are you in favor of adopting the bylaw? There is no broad rate implication in terms of ubiquitous application of the fee for households outside of the service area. It's not a general tax. And so, and it's not tied to property value. So this is what residents will be voting on May 1st for advanced voting and May 11th for general polls. Digging into the maximum requisition amount a little bit further, MRA for short. A lot of people ask sort of, are you going to increase the fee every year or something like that? So the maximum requisition amount is a maximum, and we cannot exceed that $283 per household per year for the first 5 years the service is put in place. So that's 2025 to 2029. The cost per household cannot go above that. What we may do is set the per household cost lower than the max and then work up to it over time. After 2029, the maximum requisition amount can increase by up to 25%, and it can go up by 25% once every 5 years. And so we may look at the service and say, we're not recovering necessary costs based on this per household fee to deliver the service. And so we may need to increase the per household costs in 2029, depending on sort of how it falls, in 5 years by an amount that would allow us to recover the cost of delivering the service. It could not exceed 25%, but it may not be 25%. It may be less than 25% increase. The way that we would recover or receive the money from the resident households would be either a utility fee or a parcel tax. And if the referendum passes, a separate bylaw will be required to set that method of cost recovery. We are not intending to charge vacant lots. It will not be a general tax. Only that addresses that have access to the service would be charged for the service. And unfortunately, we don't have the ability to provide an opt-out clause for the service. And so even if you're someone who doesn't want the service or doesn't feel they need the service or feels the service costs too much, if it passes in a referendum, all households within that service area boundary would have to pay for the service regardless if they support it. And we aren't able to provide an opting out option. The The reason for this is that doing so, for one, would be extremely administratively challenging, a lot of sort of paperwork and back and forth to sort that out. It would also change the per household costs that we're estimating and intending to provide the service at. And so if over here you have a bunch of people who want it, and over here you have a few people who don't, or a bunch of people that don't, and then that changes and that flip-flops, it sort of makes it really difficult to set a consistent price for everyone. And so that's why we're relying on the referendum and the voter to decide if the service should proceed. And I know that that's frustrating for a lot of people and doesn't sit well, and I think that's fair. It is the process that we're in, and you know, I think using your vote and exercising that through the referendum is super important in that regard. Okay, so why are we proposing this? What's you know, what are the benefits? What are the perceived benefits? And why is the RDCK interested in providing this kind of service? So the green bin program especially increases options for diverting waste from our landfills. We know that organic waste makes up roughly 35% of household waste, and that's province-wide. We do have local data from a waste audit that backs that up and shows that landfill waste is comprised of, you know, roughly 30% per one waste audit, you know, but on average, 35% of household waste is compostable material. So even if you're someone who composts at home, the green bin does accept more items than you typically would be putting in your backyard composter. So all fruit and veggie scraps, so this would include citrus, you know, avocado, pits and peels, things that are harder for backyard composters to process, cooked food, oily foods, small amounts of solidified grease, things that you typically would not be putting in your backyard compost, fish meats and small bones, dairy and grains, as well as food soiled paper and cardboard. And so even if you're an avid backyard composter, that's great. These kinds of services can augment those systems, maybe used seasonally in the winter when your backyard compost is down, or those items that you typically wouldn't consider as compostable, but certainly do continue to make up a certain percentage of your waste that is landfilled. That's a big one for us, and I think it's a pretty simple rationale, keeping compostable materials out of our landfills. By providing a curbside collection service, you also increase access to an equal level of service. And so, you know, you could be saving trips to the landfills and your transfer stations. As well, it's been shown that providing curbside collection service makes separating waste streams easier and leads to greater rates of diversion. So this would be for including recycling and including food waste. The price that we've landed on, this $283 per household per year, is a cost-effective rate. And so if you compare our estimates with the private sector, if you're someone who would sort of look to access this level of service independently, it's a very competitive rate, albeit it might be higher than many people are currently paying if they're managing their waste and you know, really committed to managing their waste and keeping their household garbage to a minimum. That said, it is a cost-effective rate. For the recycling, that will remain in place and unchanged regardless of the outcome of the referendum. That is a direct service provided to residents for free with no involvement from the RDCK, and there will be no impact to that existing service. So I think, you know, if folks aren't already aware of the rationale for keeping organic waste out of landfills, there's a few fairly compelling reasons to do so. Predominantly, keeping something out of our landfill that doesn't need to be there makes a lot of sense. And so organic waste, it creates pollution, for one thing. Landfills are environmental hazards. They're not benign facilities. They have an environmental impact, and organic waste sort of makes worse the environmental impact that these facilities have by contributing to something called leachate. And leachate is sort of the liquid runoff that's generated in landfills. And so if we can reduce the amount of organic waste that's placed in our landfills, we can also reduce the sort of cost and difficulty and challenge of managing landfills in an environmentally responsible way. We do so, but organic waste makes it increasingly challenging to sort of contain those sites. As well, putting something in our landfills that don't need to be there, taking up space, valuable and finite airspace within our landfill. Finding a new landfill is not a cheap endeavor, and we don't particularly have very many options locally for landfill expansion or creation of new landfills. The big one, one of the big ones, is also that when organic waste is landfilled, it rots in an oxygen poor environment, in an anaerobic environment. And so when organic waste is placed in an environment where it has no access to oxygen, it begins to rot, and it's sort of that stinky, putrid smell that you might associate with rotting food, but amplified a whole bunch of times. And so when you realize that landfill generated methane, this process of anaerobic decomposition accounts for up to 23% of our national methane emissions. And then you think that methane emissions are 80 times more potent than carbon dioxide as a greenhouse gas over a 20-year period when they're emitted into our atmosphere. It starts to make a lot of sense to keep these materials out of the landfill. It's an impactful, immediate climate action to reduce our local climate emissions, while also having the opportunity to turn something that is a waste into an actual resource in the form of compost. And just to sort of go into our waste composition study from earlier last year, the sort of estimates for single family homes, compostable organics comprised, through this one point in time study, 29% of single family homes was comprised of compostable material. This goes up for the commercial sector, it's up to 35% for the commercial sector, and overall it's roughly 25% across the RDCK for material that is landfilled. As well as we have a huge diversion potential to keep other things that should be out of our landfill, like paper and plastic and metal and glass. Up to 60% of what we're currently landfilling can be kept out of our landfills if we have effective diversion services and strategies and participation. So the food waste that's collected currently from the Green Bin program in the city of Castlegar, the regional district Kootenay Boundary has a weekly food waste collection service that includes Roslyn and Trail and Montrose and Fruitvale. That material is coming to our central composting facility. And so we're able to take this material that previously to the construction of these facilities was a waste, and we're turning it into compost through actively composting it in a controlled environment, aerating it, keeping it, balancing the nutrient ratios and keeping it ideal moisture content. And through this process, we're able to take this material and actually turn it into a Class A compost, which means that it's fit for growing food and landscaping, lawn, top dressing, pretty much any soil improvement needs. The material that we're creating in these facilities will be available once we've sort of screened it and tested it and verified that it is indeed Class A. The intent is to sell it and distribute it back to residents and businesses into the future. We don't have any yet available. That's something that will be coming. Just a fairly new program. We just started in August of 2023 for the central composting facility. I think it's an important circular economy and waste reduction effort, regardless of if you're supportive of the curbside collection service. It is a valuable service and solution that we have invested in. So just a couple more slides. Save the date if you haven't already, Wednesday, May 1st, 8 a.m. to 8 p.m. advanced polls, 8 a.m. to 8 p.m. on Saturday, May 11th. Both days voting will take place at the Cathcart District Community Complex for the service. Okay, and I haven't been able to monitor the chat, but are there any questions from public, from the folks with us today? Either through the chat or feel free to unmute.
Yeah, thanks, Matt. I'll read out one. There is a question from Mike. He's asking if the current recycling program is running a deficit yearly, and how would the garbage program be run differently not to run a deficit? So I can take a stab at this question. So the current curbside program is in Area J for recycling is, as Matt mentioned, is managed by Recycle BC, and the RDCK is not involved in that at all. Our depot collection system that we operate is 100% tax funded, and that cost is shared by all residents. Our recycling program doesn't run a deficit. It is, but the cost is managed by all the residents that pay into that service in the West Sub-region. To ensure that this curbside program does not run a deficit, it could only proceed if the referendum is successful, and if the contracted services and all the other costs when we go through the procurements stay under that maximum value, and the contract would be set for a 5-year term, and so it would have to run under that maximum per household cost. Is there anything else to add to that, anyone?
No, I think, yeah, that covers that. Yeah, any more questions? And if so, and you want to ask them at a later time, we do have an engagement platform where you can ask questions, engage.rdck.ca. You can find the curbside collection project, where you can also reach out.
Okay. Oh, hi, it's Deb. Sorry, I couldn't figure out how to unmute my my thing here. I have a question or two. Can you guys hear me?
Mm-hmm.
Okay.
Go ahead.
Are you guys going to be, Matt and Yuli, will you be at the meeting? At the vote, I should say? No.
No.
Okay. I asked some questions about the whole voting thing, and I got a very long message back from Tom Dewell, quoting lots of sections of the Elections Act and not really answering my questions. Now, I just, you know, I kind of was looking for yes and no's, but that's okay. I'll just keep engaging.
Can you ask the questions? Maybe we can answer them in a less legal language. We try.
Okay, what's up, Penny?
I think if we were to show up at the voting place, other than me to vote, it would be viewed as interfering with the vote, and we couldn't do that, Deb. So that's why you can't sort of lobby on election day.
Yeah, no, I get that. I guess I was more asking if you'd been through the process. So that's sort of the, because I haven't been to a referendum. So Yuli, one of the questions that I asked was, does a permanent resident certificate qualify as Canadian citizen?
I can answer that if you want to, Henny. Yeah, so no, I can assure you it does not, because a permanent resident, as I am myself, is not eligible to vote. You have to be either a Canadian citizen. Yeah, it boils down to that. If you are only like me, a permanent resident, you're not allowed to vote.
Thank you, Yuli. That is exactly what I was looking for. So the answer is no. Okay, thank you for that. And the other question I asked was more about the process, because I've never been to a referendum. So I just wanted to know, like, you walk in the door and go up to somebody and prove that you're, well, first of all, I wanted to just confirm, and I know you can do it. You can register on the day. That I know. So somebody walks in the door, they register, and then do they get a piece of paper and they go into a booth and then put it in a box?
I think it works like any other election, and if I'm not, I know one of the slides showed the exact question that would appear on the ballot on
Yes.
voting day.
Mhm.
That's the wording will be that, and you either mark yes or no. It's not complicated. I don't think, there's not multiple options or anything else. It's just, are you in favor, yes or no? And it gives the wording and the amount, if I'm not mistaken.
Okay, and then you
Yeah.
would just deposit it in a secure box or something.
Yeah, ballot box, same
Yeah.
as any other election.
Okay, all right. Thank you for that. So I had a question about the number of houses. I think it's 14 households, 1,481 or something like that. And I never really looked at the whole area J, but why isn't it the whole area J?
Yeah, it's a great question. So there are just a handful of houses that are outside of it, but we didn't look at, say, Deer Park and areas further up Broadwater Road as within the feasible area, just too far away from the urban center, too difficult to sort of run the collection vehicle out there. So those households outside of the feasibility catchment are not included, but we did look to include basically any household that was considered feasible. That would be classified as sort of single family and meet those other criteria. But we did have predominantly driving distance boundaries from a waste disposal site. And so that's really, I believe it's 50 kilometers was the radius. And then we did have some elevation parameters around not being way up off of a public road. And so, I think our criteria was 200 meters elevation change maximum between a public road and a private residence. And so that really rules out anyone who sort of lives way up a crazy road.
Right, okay. Yeah. And did you have
yeah, I think part of it, the same parameters were used, I think, around whether people got curbside recycling or not. Not everyone in Area J gets curbside recycling simply because it's not feasible, it's not cost effective, all that kind of stuff. It's the same thing here.
Yeah, that makes sense.
Yeah.
So is there a minimum number of households that a program like this works? Like, was that the minimum number, or how?
I can try to answer that. For other areas, we had a minimum number because we wanted to establish a recycling program. In Area J, you have already a recycling program. And the reason why the recycling program is the trigger for needing a minimum household number is that Recycle BC, that pays the service provider a certain amount of money for providing the curbside recycling, demands a minimum number of households and household density in order to partner with us. So in Area J, that doesn't matter because you have already curbside recycling. In Area H and E, where we as well going for a vote in regards to that development, and we intend to implement a recycling program with it, there we have to have a minimum a number of households.
Okay, all right. Has anyone mentioned or commented on the, for lack of a better word, noise pollution? That, the garbage trucks are very noisy. And has anyone mentioned a concern about them going down the street, uh, 3 times more often than they do now? Like, has that been a concern of anybody's?
I haven't heard that concern from anyone. That's not to say I talked to everyone. I will say that one of the biggest complaints I get, or not biggest, but the most regular complaints I get is about the traffic on Columbia Road of self-haulers going to the dump. Anyone that lives along that stretch will tell you that, it's a bit of a speedway, particularly on Saturdays. And it's anecdotally, at least, the self-haulers. I mean, it's pretty easy to tell they're self-hauling. They got pickup trucks with garbage cans in the back. So that I've heard that complaint quite a bit. I have not had anyone raise a concern with me about the noise of garbage trucks. I just haven't.
Okay. All right.
And that specific traffic to the landfill, the individual traffic, would actually be reduced through a curbside program.
I mentioned the weight of the garbage being a concern, a potential concern, because I know that they won't pick up past a certain weight. And the garbage cans that you're proposing are actually quite large. If they were filled, that would be really heavy. So I could see that being a bit of a problem for the contractor, or setting up the contract anyway. Darn, I was really hoping that there would be more people on. I suppose maybe my final comment might be the format. In hindsight, and it was the first question raised at the live meeting, that it be held as a hybrid, both with like the budget meeting was. Yeah, I'm really surprised that there's not more people on. I don't know if it was not advertised. I had it in my calendar, so I don't know. I just thought maybe you might want to just do a little postmortem after, because to have 50 residents at one meeting and 2 or 3, there was 3 at the second, just seems really odd. Anyway.
Yeah. You know what? I will say that I find hybrid meetings to be a bit of a nightmare, especially if I'm the one that's not in the room. You're definitely at a disadvantage. I prefer in person. I just think they're a lot, I just think they're better.
Yeah, but it does disenfranchise. It does disenfranchise somebody who can. What you get when you have a hybrid, the benefit is that you get a bigger attendance and you get more engagement. Somebody will make a question that'll remind somebody else, oh yeah, I wanted to ask that, right? So they feed off, one question feeds off another, and you get a really robust engagement from in person, but also adding in the people that can't attend. I did have one more question.
Okay, Deb, you know what? You and I are going to have to agree to disagree on the value of hybrid meetings.
Yeah, if I can add to that, Deb, in our experience, it is sometimes very difficult for people online listening to a live meeting, because if it is not very quiet and the system isn't totally perfectly set up, every little noise in the room actually doesn't allow you to hear anything online. And believe me, I'm sitting through a lot of meetings as part of my job, and I prefer to be in the room than online, because very often I cannot hear what is being talked, because there's a private conversation, somebody drops a pen, or somebody not paying attention bangs their foot against the table, and you online can no longer follow the discussion.
And that's a valid point, but I think that's, I think it's, it's not a nanny state, right? If somebody doesn't want to attend online, don't attend online. But if there are some people that just can't make it to a meeting for one reason or another. So, so my last question actually goes back to that meeting. And I kind of lost the plot on the discussion on the number of, the fellow at the back of the room, the accountant, and he was doing the math in his head. And number of, I don't know if it was residents or households that actually responded favorably in order to bring this referendum out. So the number 4.7% sort of sticks in my head. Was that what he said? Do you remember? Like, or do you know? Like when you do all the, because Matt, it was you that seemed like you were doing the math in your head at the same time, and you said, yeah, and he made a correction, and you went, yeah, that's right. So can you confirm that conversation?
It as I recall it, it was about that number of percent, but effectively it doesn't matter. If you had only 2 people responding to the survey and both of them said yes, then the majority of the people responding to the survey responded yes, right? Yes, we do look overall, did we have enough responses? And quite frankly, 4% of the overall electorate, if that was the number, is actually a relatively good response to a survey about a topic where there is potentially a service evolving from. So we were actually quite happy with that number, and we used that percentage, whatever that was. We're happy with the amount of reviews and responses we got, and the responses in area J were in the 50% range for, or call it against, that service, but it was close enough that we felt it was absolutely necessary to ask everyone in order to get feedback if residents want that service or not.
Okay.
Yeah, and Deb, I would just, all the sort of numbers and percents and stuff are in a public report on the results of the phase 2 consultation. And I did just link that into the chat. It's also on our engagement website on the Curbside consultation project page. Happy to dig into it. But we felt like both the number of responses that we received and the results that we received was justified in allowing the public to decide in a referendum through assent voting, and sort of once and for all make the decision through that process. And so happy to kind of get into crunch the numbers and talk about best practices regarding public consultation and sort of what's considered a statistically valid sample size in that regard. But it is a publicly available report that was provided to the directors, and we did receive all of the sort of elected official approvals to proceed with the service establishment bylaws. So that process is very well documented and publicly available. And I think if there's sort of really detailed questions regarding those numbers, might be better suited for sort of a conversation back and forth.
Oh yeah, sure. Thanks.
And Deb-
I see the
Deb,
report.
Deb, hang on just one sec. There was a question from Mike in the chat, and I think I inadvertently may have, I don't know, erased it or something, but he was saying, so if two people, if only two people show up to vote, it passes unanimously. We were at that point, Mike, talking about survey results and participation in a voluntary survey. I don't think anyone in their right mind would go ahead with a referendum based on two responses to a survey. There was enough interest that we felt, and I felt, there was value to going to referendum on this. It will make a big difference to the environment. I believe that. And the other thing about it is that people in Area J have a choice about this. It's not being brought in the way it did with the city. You have a vote and you get to decide. I could have decided for everyone that it was a question that wasn't worth asking and we weren't going to go ahead. But I really believe that there's value to the program and it is a question worth asking the residents of Mike's other question is there a required number of votes to pass or fail? 50% plus one, I think, is the correct answer.
Yeah.
I think we might have lost Mike now. Oh,
Mike's-
no, he's still here.
hang on,
Okay.
he's
Left
back.
and came back.
Mike, back.
Yeah.
50% plus one.
Yeah, and I think the other part was there a minimum voter threshold in terms of if only two people came up to the Assent vote, the referendum, would it pass if they both voted yes? And in short, the answer is yes, there is no minimum voter threshold for the vote itself. We would love to see great voter turnout, but there is no minimum number of voters. It is the majority of whoever shows up to vote. For the referendum, for the Assent vote. I hope that answers maybe the other part of the question.
I did have one more question.
Yeah,
See, these things, I don't have them written down. They've been just rattling around in my head. Your slide where you say what the percentage of the garbage is, and that is obviously, your standard garbage per garbage. Like it wasn't, I think you said the organics is what? 30%?
35
or higher. Now,
Yeah.
I'm just checking that was some sort of a standard average. You didn't check with people in Area J, I'm guessing.
We did a waste composition study this summer at the Udasheni landfill, so that is our data.
Oh, so at the landfill, the people bring their bags of garbage. Is that right? And you went through and you did an assessment on that. Is that what that slide represents? Is from the Udasheni landfill?
Yeah, and the waste composition study just went to the committee in, was that March or February? So the data is new. So we did the study both in Creston and at Udasheni, and we looked at both. We looked at a variety of different waste streams. So we looked at self-haul, we looked at curbside programs from the municipality, we looked at commercial loads. So we, the 30 or 35% that's presented in the slide is an average number from our specific data from those variety of different waste streams.
Right. And yeah, so it doesn't, do you have the number or the breakdown for just the self-haul?
I don't have it off the top. We could send you a link to that document and share it with you.
I'm just curious because I compost, so there's no organics in my compost, very little. So I was just curious of the your average Area J resident, what their garbage actually looks like, their garbage, right? So I just wondered if you had somehow ascertained what the Area J residents breakdown was.
Yeah, I mean, the breakdown at Udashenia would be those that bring it to that tipping wall at
Yep.
the Udashenia landfill. And so there could be a variety of people using that. It could even be residents from Castlegar. It could be from Area H. It could even be from F or E. We didn't screen people and ask them what their address was. So there are some limitations. It is who self-hauled to Udashenia.
Yeah. Okay. All right. I think that's it for me.
Thanks for coming to both sessions and
Yeah,
the engagement
thanks,
for
Deb.
everyone.
So Deb, if
Yeah.
you're interested in getting that information about the waste composition study, could you email us, or does someone have your contact to follow up with you?
Yeah, Amy, I can email you directly.
Okay, great.
Yeah. Too bad we didn't have more folks, but do appreciate your time for joining us.
Okay. Well, thank you all.
Mike, and I think Fred has already left us.
I'm going to stop the recording, but thank you very much.